Caddis Maximus here, this time with a little review of the SK Tough. This is the 40975. So this is essentially what replaced their original, nearly 100-year-old design 40970. I really like this little ratchet, but it is true it's gotten a bit thicker and a bit bulkier than the old version was. Well, I do think it's nicer. I mean, it does have a nice steel reverse gear, more easy to take apart. I mean, this little clip isn't too bad. But a lot of people have been having, or I saw a lot of comments about self-reversing, and I haven't seen any issues with this little SK. Like this Proto 5252, this thing self-reverses all the time. I really cleaned it out, and it seems to be a little bit better, but Proto, surprisingly enough, I've had the worst problems with self-reversing. With this little SK, there were actually a lot of comments about self-reversing and various issues, and this thing just has not had any issues whatsoever. I haven't even cleaned this or opened it up, just bought it used. No issues. This thing works absolutely perfectly for me. So, roundhead ratchets, it seems in general, regardless of how expensive they are, self-reversing is an issue. And it seems a little bit puzzling, and it happens to both pair heads as well as round heads. With round heads, the issue happens is that when you're operating the ratchet, the wheel will get pulled just a little bit, and then it allows the pawl of the freewheel, and it kind of operates the switch inappropriately. Haven't really noticed that with this one, but it is something to be aware of. I should say on that point, I probably own now 10 different ratchets. This is a Mustang, but it's a New Britain design ratchet. Probably the best roundhead ratchet that was ever made, or at least designed. I run into so many of these. Some of them so dirty that they barely turn, but they still ratchet just fine. The reverse mechanism on them is just super stiff. You almost need pliers to turn that thing. This thing will never self-reverse on you. So I did want to point that out, that it seems that New Britain really showed everybody up. Their design is almost unbeatable. But I do like this little SK. In my opinion, it is a lot better than the old original one, because these have a single pawl design, where this feels like it's a block and pawl. How you do know that is on the original rocking pawl design, the reverse lever only moves just a little bit, and we'll open these up in a second. Where on this one, the reverse moves quite a bit more. So I think this is designed like some of those Craftsman or Allen wrenches, Allen brand ratchet wrenches I've talked about. And many modern roto heads, such as the Harbor Freight Icons, use what is known as a block and pawl. But as far as this thing's concerned, I think the detent is strong. It's stronger than this little guy, and works really smoothly. I like the tightness of the mechanism. I mean, that is actually quite tight. Overall, not a bad little ratchet. A little bit expensive. On eBay, these things seem to be going for around $30, which I guess is an okay price for a SK USA, but I could certainly understand people's disappointment if you have self-reversing issues. Anyway, let's take a quick look inside these things. If I can get this open. Always a little bit fun with these little pinch rings. You got to kind of pinch them. There we go. And get them apart. And so this is what always has annoyed me. Here's my reverse switch. There's my little spring. I could probably re-lube this one. Is that the original SKs just had really tiny pawls. One of the reasons they do work so much better and don't skip like many other rocking pawl designs is because the pawl is much wider. And so it has a different angle, essentially a different angle that's engaging the head with. So I have to say that even though it's not particularly strong, that the SK design is reliable for a rocking pawl. This type of pawl design here that SK invented, they invented the round head ratchet, is what 80-90% of all round head ratchets use. Every single cheap Chinese hardware store round head ratchet all uses a similar design to this, but they tend to use narrower pawls, which just aren't quite as reliable. Now, let's take a look at this SK here. This is, I believe they call this the Tough Series. We'll pull out the top screw, and I believe this is going to be a block and pawl design. Some people have also had machining issues where if this screw is too tight, then it locks up, and if it's too loose, and it appears that it has even more self-reversing issues. Like I said, I must have got lucky on this one. We do have a little bit of Loctite on that screw. Once again, our steel reverse lever. And yes, it's a heart spring design. This is the exact same design that the Icons at Harbor, the Icon round head ratchets at Harbor Freight use. The little Titan mini roto head ratchets. It's all using this, which is the block and pawl design, or sometimes called the heart spring design, because of course this spring looks like a heart. Once again, and people are correct, SK is using some pretty heavy grease in there. On this type of design, that can cause this pawl to want to get pretty stuck. And really, you should use very light oil. And so that's something I've learned. My subscribers remind me early on. Synthetic greases do better, but most greases are organic and then they harden up, and it just is terrible for ratchets. So you really want to use a real light oil, just some kind of, sewing machine oil, 3-in-1, just any kind of a light motor oil. Just don't use grease, because the way it just thickens up and makes these mechanisms not work properly. As far as the engagement, I mean, this thing is, if we can get this to focus, is just huge. Look at the size of that pawl and its engagement area. I mean, here's the 70 series. There's 3 little tiny teeth there. I mean, the surface area of this pawl is like 10 times what this is. This is the type of ratchet where the head would split well before the anvil will shear off, well before it ever skips, as long as it's running smoothly. So I do approve of this design. But yes, there are issues, and it has to do with machining. These ratchets, the thicknesses between the body, the heights here, it's much more sensitive. So if you have something where the ratchet body is just a little bit too tall, this got machined just a little bit shorter, then when you tighten down the switch, it ends up binding up. And so that can create some problems. I do like the fact that they have a press fit steel pin in the reverse lever here, or the reverse knob. Makes it a little bit more reliable. So I approve of heart spring designs. They just need to be lightly oiled. I've had great luck with them and really like them just because they're a simple and very reliable and robust design. Their Achilles heel is the fact that they require higher tolerances in manufacturing in order to really work reliably, where a system like this, I've reviewed dozens of round head ratchets. Some of them have anvils that just wobble all over the place. Just a huge amount of wobble, and still work just fine. And so that's probably the one advantage to this style, is that it will work even when it's really loose and poorly manufactured. Something that could contribute to issues is I'm noticing this is an asymmetric pawl. You can see how there's a relief on one corner. This corner, or this relief, was pointing right there, I assume, to help reduce its chances of getting caught right in that corner right there in the anvil. There we go. Those are all of our cleaned parts. Let me get this thrown back together. Now that I just got this back together, I understand part of the issue here is, like, on some of the other designs of this, they have machined a little post on the top of the block of the anvil, so when the wheel sits down on it and you torque it down, the screw torques right on the little boss instead of putting pressure on the reverse lever. And that's the issue with this SK. Actually, when I was tightening it down, I just tightened it down, and indeed tightened right down to where it locked up. So I had to back off a little bit on the screw, and then that's why it has Loctite on it. And so it stays in a certain place. So I can see where SK did make an error there. You do have to be careful about how tight that screw is. Otherwise, it really is a solid design, but they just need something to create a standoff between the screw and something for the reverse switch to ride on, so that it doesn't, so you don't have it, so you can torque down the screw and not have to worry about it over tightening and locking up the reverse lever. Overall, I think this is a really pretty nice ratchet, but if you don't make sure, or if this screw ends up, the Loctite wears out, or you've rebuilt it a few times, or oil gets in there and that screw wants to loosen up, yeah, it could certainly cause you some issues. So one little design oversight can definitely explain quite a few of the issues people have. Otherwise, I mean, compared to this, I mean, the mechanism is just massive. Just way more surface area, fine-tooth, and really reliable. But that screw really does indeed need to be just at the right torque. So, sorry for spending so much time talking about this ratchet or these ratchets and knocking them down. I know 10 minutes is way too long, but there's a lot of comments about this little SK, and I think it's a beautiful little ratchet. But it's kind of disappointing that they had that kind of design oversight where you really have to be careful about that screw, and the screw really should just be totally covered in Loctite so you can tighten it down to a certain spot and then have it stay there. That way it'll run smoothly, reverse smoothly, keep the anvil tight, but you don't have to worry about it actually wanting to self-reverse or anything like that. And once again, you know, the old Husky USAs, Mustang USAs, New Britons, they all use the New Britain style patented ratchet design. And as far as history can tell, I think it still is one of the most proven roundhead, at least for roundheads, still one of the most proven designs that have ever come out. Just super duper reliable. Overall, for this SK, I'd say for some of the annoyances that you have, I would get one of these maybe if you're paying 20 bucks, but this is something where, you know, if you're paying 30, 40, 50 dollars for this little ratchet, to have to pay such close attention to that little screw is really kind of disappointing, and I'd probably recommend against it. Anyway, really appreciate everybody who's been watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.